Any strategic discussions about Asia will inevitably include China, the dominant power in the Eastern Hemisphere. The White House says the Obama administration doesn't want this trip to look like it's part of an anti-China containment effort. Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is Stephen Harner, who's worked in Japan for more than 12 years. He's also written extensively about U.S. China relations. Also with us, Robert Daly, the director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, and Ming Wan, professor of government and politics at George Mason University right here in Washington. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start with you, Stephen Harner. The United States is reiterating its security treaty obligations during President Obama's trip. In effect, President Obama is saying, according to the Guardian newspaper, that we are duty-bound to protect Japan in the event of a conflict. Firstly, let me ask you, how will that be seen in China? And secondly, is it good policy on the part of the United States?
I would say that President Obama's statement is nothing new in terms of what the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty provides, Article 5 of that treaty. But the point is that the entire alliance with Japan and the pivot policy or the rebalancing policy, which is intended to strengthen that alliance, is really destabilizing in Asia. It is perceived by China correctly as a potential threat, and is in fact the reason for much of the tension that exists in Asia today. And until that the U.S. alliance structure is changed, I don't think we're going to achieve harmony or sort of mutually satisfactory relations within the region.
Professor Wan, do you agree?
Yeah, my feeling is that I agree with him that in a sense he hasn't really changed the long-standing U.S. policy over this. The only difference is the location. Was in Japan, and a president says so. So in a sense that you would expect some reaction from the Chinese side. At the same time, I think the administration, President Obama, is seeking to strike a balance to reassure the allies this is his main purpose for this trip. At the same time, without alienating the Chinese government. But this is getting harder to do. The reason, obviously, is because China and Japan have such different interests, and they expect U.S. to do different things.
Robert Daly, is that the big challenge for President Obama, showing support for the allies in Asia, but at the same time not alienating the Chinese?
That is certainly what he's attempting to do, as you suggest. It's getting tougher to do that because of changes primarily in Chinese dispositions, although not Chinese dispositions alone. Nevertheless, I would disagree that the rebalance is a threat to China. There are serious questions about whether the rebalance is achievable or sustainable, how strong the American will is behind it, how strong our means are. But I would challenge the Chinese side to articulate clearly what interests of China's are threatened explicitly by the rebalance. That is not clear to me.
Is it a situation of one or the other? Can the United States do both? Maintain support and not alienate China?
It depends, of course, in part on what China really wants in the long term. This is the very big question. If China is going to insist that all of the territory within what they call the 9-dash line is in fact either China's core interest and sacred territory or is something like a zone of deference, then we do have a real conflict of interests that the president will not be able to walk that line over time. Nevertheless, the attempt to persuade China that America's rebalance, such as it is not aimed at China, is an important part of the strategy.
Michael Harner, let's talk about one of the disputes that currently... Sorry, go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, to say that the so-called rebalance or pivot is not a threat to China, it's certainly... What it is its objective is to maintain or continue U.S. hegemony, meaning overwhelming power in Asia, in East Asia, through a series of alliances and obviously forward military bases. That potentially that represents domination of the region militarily. and obviously a potential threat to China at any time. I don't see how that is not clear. Certainly clear from the Chinese perspective. And all right, now we can go further. I believe you want to talk about the Diaoyu or Senkaku issue. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Before we get there, I just want to ask Robert Daly to respond to what you heard there.
Well, the United States and China are long since able to threaten each other without forward deployed bases. We can threaten each other from our mainlands with the weapons that we have. So the removal of bases themselves doesn't remove a threat. I obviously do understand, I think, why China doesn't like the bases in Asia. But again, what efforts or ambitions of China's specifically are stymied by that has not been articulated. China continues to grow its military capability legitimately,
right,
and to go into the Indian Ocean and into the Pacific. So other than the clarity of why, as an emotional fact, they would rather we weren't there, I say specific ambitions or interests that cannot be achieved under the current security structure. Now, I should add to that that I do believe that China needs to be given an active voice in refining and improving the security structure. China's rise is legitimate. Its increase in military capabilities is in the main legitimate. And so we need to have these discussions, but they need to be very clear.
Okay, Stephen, I'll get to you in a moment. I want to go to Professor Wan.
Can I reverse the question?
Yeah, Stephen, I'll come to you in a moment. I just want to get the view from Professor Wan here. Okay. What does China see as the threat? Let's say, for instance, the dispute over the Diaoyu Islands, called the Senkaku by Japan. Isn't that one of the sources of friction between China and the United States, China and Japan?
Yeah, here in Washington, D.C., right, the U.S. intention in Asia seems very clear, straightforward. U.S. wants to maintain the stability, calm things down, and wants to have access to a growing region, and has defense obligations. But even here, people debate what is the true intention of the rebalancing, what's the ultimate objective. And people in Beijing, in China, are also sort of following development here, and they naturally feel confused to some extent. Partly is because they have different interests. They, in a sense, there's a wishful thinking on their side. The U.S. and Japan do not have the similar interests, even though they're allies. Japan wants the U.S. to be really firm on these disputed islands. And to some extent, they got that, verbally at least, from President Obama. But the U.S., on the other hand, wants to also maintain some relationship with China.
The United States policy on those islands is still a little bit ambiguous. It's pretty murky. I want to come back to that in a moment. Let's go to Stephen Harner. Stephen Harner, you wanted to say something, and I just want to throw something else into the mix. That there is a view in some quarters that the United States response to what China is doing is containment. It's trying to contain the rise of China in the world.
Well, I'll first of all just continue the thought, which was, I think Professor Daly mentioned that we can contain each other without the bases.
No threat. You mentioned the threat.
That's exactly it. Or the threat. We can threaten each other without the bases. So why the bases? Well, yes. Why the bases? Why do we have the bases there? What is the purpose of the bases? What the bases do is simply create an imbalance. I mean, it's like China having bases in Catalina Island in California. What's the point? It's a completely unbalanced situation in favor of the U.S. military power, very close to China,
right,
and potentially a threat, much more potential threat to them than any Chinese threat to us, which I presume you're talking about a military nuclear strategic threat, which I don't think is even thinkable. But sorry, we were going to, what was it?
The other issue? The word you often hear mentioned when you talk about United States relations with China is containment.
I don't see, the trouble with, the issue is, why should we contain China? I mean, China's interest And we're talking about naval interests primarily, which is how they are projecting, about the only way they're projecting power outside of China is through their Navy, is freedom of the seas, freedom of navigation for resources that go in and out of China and also for their exports. There's nothing threatening about that in terms of projecting power to defend their territory as they see it. Well, that seems to me to be sort of common sense or non-controversial. Containing China, I think the Chinese view not just the military U.S. posture as a containment policy, or potentially containment policy, because of the potential of the Seventh Fleet to blockade Chinese shipping lanes and so forth, and also the air-sea battle concept of planning for a war with China. But it's not just that; it's containment even in soft power, in terms of a U.S. expression of universal values that would compete with China. It's competing with China in soft power, competing with China in trade relations in terms of, let's say, trade agreements. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, would be one initiative now. These are not initiatives that seem to be open to China, that seem to be welcoming to China.
Okay.
And that is... yeah.
Right, okay, so Robert Daly, I want to go to you quickly, and this is about the dispute over the Diaoyu Islands, as I said, also called the Senkaku Islands by Japan. It looks like United States policy is ambiguous, it's murky, because on the one hand, the United States is not saying anything about the ultimate sovereignty of those islands, but at the same time, it's saying it will come to Japan's aid if push goes to shove.
Under Article 5 of the Defense Treaty. Yes, and I think that this is, in some cases, we don't want to embolden either side. China, of course, sees this position as emboldening Japan, but as you all mentioned at the outset, the American statement that Article 5 does cover the Diaoyu Senkakus is nothing new. As China knows well, we are also working closely with Japan to try to ramp down the rhetoric. We have also been disturbed by Abe's visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, by statements of his appointees, including people to NHK, grossly offensive, that China and the United States had a conspiracy to create the Nanking Massacre in order to distract attention from America's bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I had the privilege of living in Nanjing for 6 years. This is offensive to everything. So we actually do work with Japan to ramp down that rhetoric, and President Obama has in fact been calling on both sides to talk and resolve it peacefully.
Professor Wan?
Yeah, and part of the reason why it's so difficult to balance in Asia is, of course, the nature of the relationship between some Asian countries have worsened significantly, certainly between China and Japan, and then between Japan and South Korea. And part of the challenge is that many people in Japan want the United States to contain China. In fact, they get upset. From that perspective, U.S. is not strong enough on China. So in the sense that you can see surrounding this particular visit, the Japanese government was making a tremendous effort, essentially to send a signal to the Chinese government about the strength of the alliance.